Okay, we are recording. Good morning to all.
Morning,
And to Jerry,
everyone.
to Carol, to
Good morning,
Harriet,
Carol.
Charlie,
Good
Reed,
morning.
Good
Hello,
morning.
Miss Judith.
Hi, Judith.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good to see all of you. Um,
Charlie, lift your head up.
Yeah.
Put
yeah,
your
we don't
camera
sure.
down.
There
There
you
you
go.
go.
There you go. We're only getting the top of your head. Now I got your whole head.
Put it the other way, Charlie.
All right. All right. I see Tammy's coming on.
Good morning.
Uh,
Good morning.
morning, morning, good morning. Actually, I want to open up another document. Oops, not that, not that. I want to, okay. In. Okay, good. Okay. I see another screen that says congregation, but Eddie, there you are. Okay. I remembered to record.
Okay.
So I'm still controlling. I can still share my screen.
No difference.
Okay, because you're listed as congregation B'nai Shalom.
No, but I'm a co-host.
Okay, fine with me.
I'm going to change my name in a minute.
Okay, that's fine. All right. Good to see all of you. I hope everyone's doing well and has got some good Thanksgiving plans, even though I understand the weather might be a little tricky around here. I hope no one's flying. They have some disruption with that, but other than that, I hope everyone's okay. Good morning, Roy.
Morning.
All right, so I'm going to share the screen. I just want to briefly review something that we looked at last time. We're talking about transgender, which, as we all know, became a hot issue. Someone might even call it, I've know people use the term wedge issue, i.e., it's an issue that kind of drives divisions among people. And as we started to discuss it last week, I think many of you spoke about how personal interactions with people who are transgender and how attitudes have changed over time. We want to take a look at some of the ways in which the traditional Judaism looks at it. And we started by looking at an article, which we did look at last week, which was this one appeared in the New York Times, Ancient Judaism. Now it says recognized a range of genders. Now this was written by, as we looked at last week, let's get to the bottom of this, yes, Rabbi Elliot Kukla, a transgender person ordained by the Reform movement. And in this op-ed piece, he pointed out just when you think the cough is gone, it comes back. And I've stopped taking cough medicine, but Ludens can help. Okay, so he was pointing out that that in the Talmud, as is the case, and we're going to see this, and this is and an interesting question he raises as to whether or not these categories that appear in the Talmud are an indication of something that should be part of Jewish understanding of transgender today. As we pointed out last time, the Talmud is in fact aware of different physical characteristics of different well, you know, they talk about infants, babies, when they're born, where sometimes it's not clear physically, are they male or are they female? And he used that argument that these differences that the rabbis understood, and we'll take a look at them in a second, he called them genders. And he used some terms, tumtum, androgynous, elonit. He points out this is not an exact equivalence between ancient categories and modern genders. Now, here's where they are. but they show us that people who are more than binary have always been recognized by my religion. We are not a fad. That is a question that we're going to raise to see how that works. The question of someone who is androgynous, who has sexual organs, both of male and female, and how unique that is and what that means in Jewish law. Now, he saw those categories as, shall we say, having clear implications for us today, that each person is unique. Now, again, he's dealing with two different issues. One, yes, the rabbi saw these categories, but what does that mean? And what's the implication? And yes, he does point out that there is a Talmudic point where that someone who is androgynous is created, is unique. Again, what does that mean in terms of what's the implication? And he points out that yes, there are issues today. We are all individuals, have distinctive outlooks. Now, the Talmudic distinctions, just to clarify them, actually, I need to share another. Oh, I made a mistake there. Sorry. I need to open up one other. Where is it? There it is. Okay. I want to open up another document because we're going to see this terminology being used, and the question is going to be, what does this all mean? Okay, do we have that? Everyone see the text there? Okay.
Yes.
It's a little vocabulary lesson.
From what text is this from, Rabbi?
Oh, this appeared in a newspaper, and I don't remember where exactly. I just picked this up somewhere. I just tried to find one place that gave us some definitions. And actually, this was listed. Here's the large question. The rabbinic rabbis understood biologically there were distinctions. The larger question is, were these distinctions mean that there were different genders? We certainly know that there was Zachar and Nekeva, male and female. And the rabbis in the Talmud recognize there's androgynous, a person who has both male and female physical sexual characteristics. Okay? That's the definition. Is it a, quote, separate gender? Is there what does it mean? Or does it just mean, oh, the rabbis recognize reality, and reality is that sometimes, rarely, but sometimes this does happen. Just as the rabbis understood tumtum, again, a Talmudic phrase, a person whose sexual characteristics are indeterminate or obscured, okay? It's a little unclear. It seems to be something that that there's some sort of covering, perhaps. Again, let me just say, medical, as we'll see, even today, the doctors are not clear about what these meant to the rabbis. But is this someone who has sexual organs who perhaps are covered or unclear, or when a baby is born, we're not sure what they are, okay? Tumtum's gender can be revealed to be either male or female. It's not clear. Then there's the Elonit. This is very odd. A female who does not develop secondary sex characteristics at puberty and is assumed to be infertile, all right? Not clear. Is that someone because of natural development or because there was some human intervention? And of course, there's the saris, that is a eunuch, a male who does not develop secondary sex characteristics at puberty or has had their sex characteristics removed, right? Either naturally, accidentally, or was castrated, right? Right. Some's considered to be natural, some just don't develop. and some through a different type. Okay. These are the Talmudic distinctions which we're going to see and try to understand. Even the whole larger question, do they really even help us understand transgender? Or is this just the rabbi saying, there are things that happen biologically that we don't understand and kind of sit in a area that doesn't fit into our distinctions? Remember, rabbinic Judaism is so much about distinctions. And these are ones, and yes, the rabbis understood there were ones that were not clear. Okay, so this gives a little help on the vocabulary. We'll see these words again in the next couple of texts that we look at. Okay, so here's a reaction to that article from the New York Times. This is appeared in the National Review. Okay, we know it's a conservative, politically to the right publication, written by Tal Fortgang, someone who has a significant resume. I always like to know who's writing these things. Law clerk on a federal court. He's remained active in what's called Tikva. Tikva is a Jewish organization, generally conservative organization. Has fellowships. He writes regularly and so on. He graduated certificate in Jewish and Judaic studies, cum laude from Princeton. In other words, no lightweight he. Okay. Now, no, the Jewish tradition does not support transgenderism. He's going to argue against the article that we just saw. Now, what are his arguments? A shallow effort to queer Judaism willfully misreads the Talmud. One has to be clear, and when one reads this, well, we'll see how the tone and the politics is echoed in the text. Not content to enlist their twisted understandings of traditional Jewish texts to fight state laws protecting unborn children. Okay, you've got a point to make, but I would say your tone is already putting me off, but okay, I understand. Progressive activists have now taken to claiming that Judaism's most sacred tenets reflect the multiplicity of gender, though such a finding had been obscured by the modern binary world until recently. That was what we just saw. He points out, he thinks is a gotcha concept that would show that all who devote their lives to Talmudic scholarship, that they got Judaism's teachings on gender all wrong. Notice, again, the polemics that we have here. In doing so, he picks up a behavior popularized by Jew haters of removing Talmudic teachings from any context to show that Judaism stands for something it clearly does not. He engages in a kind of appropriation that progressives would despise in other contexts. He draws on a tradition he does not consider binding. Absolutely true, he's a Reformed Jew. Okay. He says there are four, the article that we first saw, that there are four genders. Yes, the tumtum, right, whose genitals are obscured, androgynous, has physical characteristics of both genders, elonit, atypically developed female who does not at puberty exhibit normal female characteristics, and the eunuch. The Talmud, rigidly as it tends to be, is frequently interested in how to categorize these rare individuals. Absolutely. Okay. I had to look this word up. I used to know what it meant. By reifying, i.e., making concrete something that is abstract, categories that are relevant only in a highly binary and gender role-derived society, Wilke thus inadvertently makes the opposite point from what he intended. If he is saying that these unusual cases are defined within the context of a system that only recognizes two genders, he is in fact strengthening the argument that there only are two genders. That's the argument that we have here. Okay, None of them is a gender as the term is used today to connote a feeling or internal sense that one's true identity conforms to a set of traditionally gendered stereotypes of self-appreciation. That's an important point. In none of these cases does the Talmud say that a person with in those categories conforms to a set of traditionally gendered stereotypes of self-perception. Are you saying that someone in this category is a male or a female, is attracted to males or females, dresses like a male or a female, feels uncomfortable being called a male or a female? That's not in the Talmud. There is not an exact equivalence between these ancient categories and modern gender identities. That, I think, is an important point. The whole argument, well, again, this is a polemic, and I will say I have a little, as you can tell, I have a little trouble with the tone. The whole argument rests on a shell game, the author playing with levels of abstraction to accept the Talmud's framework at a certain level while rejecting its plain meaning. Unable to show that ancient Judaism actually recognizes multiple genders, and of course we're talking about what is a gender, right? We haven't even, are we clear what a gender is, or what gender attraction is, or what gender self-identity is? These are all much more complicated, we know today. Kukla summarizes evidence with a vague statement about Judaism rejecting binaries. Even this is wrong. 3 of the 4 listed categories are either male or female. That's true. The Talmud defines things within the binary categories of male or female. Okay, we got this difficult one. We'll stick it here. Male. We'll stick it here. Female. And the androgynous is intersex, a category that can exist only in the context of a sex binary. In other words, what he's saying is that you're making all these definitions, but the definitions exist because we have a binary system. If we didn't have a binary system, then, we could do other things, but we have a binary system. That is the system. Okay. All right. In fact, I have to say this. I mean, the tone, come on, give me a break. Kukla is pushing his essay as a craven, cheap, and pernicious farce. That's pretty strong polemic, would you say? It is not about bringing Judaism's abstract Judaism to bear on the world in a remotely honest way. An activist has gone to the New York Times with a weapon he acquired on the cheap. If that weapon would not work against skeptics of gender ideology, at least it will pull uneducated, non-observant Jews closer to the already dominant conception of their religion as a social justice program served on a bagel or the Democratic Party at prayer. Well, who's dealing in cheap polemics right now? Orthodox Jews are left to fend off these bizarre appropriations of their cherished code, and Jew haters already quick to see Talmudic influence in all kinds of behaviors that they find degenerate can hoard one more round of baseless ammunition. All right, you don't agree with the guy, but really, isn't this a bit much, would you say? I thought so, obviously. There is something fundamentally ridiculous about trying to ground progressive ideas in deeply traditional sources. Progressivism tends to distrust inherited text and ideas and the structures they create. Yet here, as well as in other contexts, such as in recent abortion arguments, progressives try to argue that their replacement structures were central to the tradition all along. Yes, progressives might argue that the context of the abortion debate in Judaism, as we've seen, is about the mother's health, not about children having a soul. That's a whole different argument. Okay. And he's talking. The Talmud has the law for everything. Where's the law of the male who thinks he is a woman? Where were the transgender presence of the Polish Dedels and the non-binary prodigies of the Lithuanian yeshivas? Where were they? They were there, buddy. I'm sorry, they were there. What they did is they hid themselves. That's what they did. or they left the community, or they committed suicide, or they did something else. Yeah, they were there. No, they didn't come out, just as people who were homosexual did not come out in general society at those times because there were penalties for doing so, and it was socially unacceptable, right? I mean, I think that's a very weak argument here, okay? Why do the most pious traditional Talmud-steeped Jews today overwhelmingly reject the notion that a woman can be a man and consider it forbidden to act as if it were so? I could argue they do that because they are following understandings of human nature that we have found to be dangerous, and also, well, we'll see in some of these other arguments. Okay, why? Okay, we'll see. It's not a serious attempt to understand honestly what ancient Judaism stands for. We'll take a look at that. It is a shallow effort to queer Judaism. The religions of which today have the woman's feelings and appropriate it as a weapon for yet another trendy progressive cause. The effort cheapens Judaism, as a result, satisfying only to those progressives to whom Judaism presents just one more set of ideas to plunder for their own ends. Yeah, it's a pretty strong polemic. Any other comments about this? I mean, I'm saying I understand he's had some good intellectual arguments, but he deals so much in polemics that I think it weakens his point. Excuse me, any other comments on this one? Am I wrong? Am I going too far on this?
Rabbi,
Yeah, Charlie, and then Rena.
yeah, the only comment I have is it's not so much biological differences. I think there's a need, we're a minority religion, and transgenders are a minority in our religion like anything else. But there's a need to accept everybody, and especially with our numbers, we need to accept people. So acceptance, which is a pragmatic choice, is the dominant theme in my mind. Anyhow, I mean, we have to accept all people.
Okay, that's a good point. We'll see in two other texts that we're going to look at the question of, is there a realistic pragmatic difference in the way we look at yes, the peasants of Lithuanian yeshivas and the Polish shtetls, were they unaware that there is a pragmatic way to deal with this? Okay, good point. Rini?
Well, I was just going to say that the Orthodox branch of Judaism is very Orthodox, at least, is very rigid in everything. And so it just is another reflection of not only rigidity, but I think ignoring that there are these things out there. And I think that's why people leave that branch. And as conservative Jews, we're much more open. You don't find female rabbis in Orthodox. You still find, a very closed society. So they're not going to admit that one of them is different. They have to all adhere to a very rigid society. That's my opinion.
Okay, so we're going to see what degree is pragmatism play, or a newer understanding of human nature, are those aspects that should be part of our discussion. Okay, now we're going to look at two teshuvot, two formal responses to transgender. That's the second one. Let's look at the first one. Okay. There were two statements made by the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards. We're familiar, just to go again, it's the highest level of authority in the conservative movement about Jewish practice. They're the ones who said we can count women in the minyan, we are egalitarian, women can be rabbis, and so on. It's made up of rabbis, 25, and they when they have a question, they ask one of the members of the committee, who are rabbis who are appointed to the committee. They are usually people who have a great deal of interest and scholarship in the issues of Jewish law, and usually one member of the committee will write a teshuvah, a response to the question, and sometimes they'll discuss it, it'll be revised, and then they'll take a vote. Now there were two teshuvot on transgender. One of them, where's the date? There it is, 2003. In the world of transgender and gay rights, 2003 is a very long time ago, right? 2003 is a long time ago. The issue first came up, and there's a couple of things that are interesting about this. It was approved on December 3rd, 2003, over 20 years ago. I looked at the vote, 10 in favor, 2 opposed, 8 abstentions. And we'll see there were a lot of abstentions in the second one. Actually, I was a little curious about that. So I wrote an email to a friend of mine who's on the committee. I said, isn't it odd that we have so many abstentions, both here and in the other one? And she wrote back to me this. I wrote to, was she on the committee at that point? Let me see. Actually, she was not on the committee at this point. She was on the committee later. Rabbi Susan Grossman was in Columbia, Maryland. And she's been on the committee. I guess she wasn't on the committee at this point, but she was later. And she said she wasn't sure why there were so many abstentions. And I don't want to read too much into this, but I'm just pointing out, it seemed to me odd that a lot of the colleagues would abstain on something like this. Did they still have some ambivalence? I think, is that an indication of some ambivalence? Perhaps. Okay. So here's the first question. What is the sexual status of a person who has undergone SRS? Can SRS define the basic status of male or female? Now, we've got a lot of talk about definitions. There are a lot of definitions that occur that we might need to be familiar with. But first of all, notice this question is not a general question about transsexuals. This is a very narrow question that is first asked 20 years ago about someone who has undergone SRS, sex reassignment surgery. It's not dealing with some of the larger issues, which is, there are people who do not go have sex reassignment surgery and feel that the gender they were born with is not the gender that they are comfortable with. This is very narrow in a sense, and we'll see the later Teshuvah tries to broaden the context. It was written by Meir Rabinowitz, who I think I mentioned I was sitting behind at the funeral of Rich Rosen's father last week in Teaneck. It wasn't a good time to ask him about this, obviously. He was one of my first Talmud teachers at the seminary and recognized as really a great scholar. And notice the question, though, is very narrow. It's just about sex reassignment surgery. What about someone who didn't have sexual reassignment surgery? And larger issues. Now, he does ask some different questions: transsexual, transgendered person, and he gives you a lot of other definitions. But if we're dealing, as this one does 20 years ago, with with a much more narrow question of Jewish law, he points out there aren't too many sources. No surprise, right? Why would we expect? We have sources about someone, excuse me, you shall not offer to the Lord anything, animals, with its testes bruised or crushed or torn or cut. You shall have no such practice in your land. The idea that sacrifices, what you're giving to God, should be as perfect as can be, right? How do we know that a castration of a man is prohibited? There are verses that you should not castrate men. And then we have laws that it's forbidden to move the genitals, both from a human and from an animal. These are matters of Jewish law. Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, states that sterilization of women is also prohibited, all right, but not punishable. So he deals with some sources. This is again Talmudically. Rabbi Hananel said that there is one who fashioned something new in his body in the form of a woman and that is not naturally possible, and some say it is androgynous. The rabbis of the Talmud seem to feel that this type of change is not possible. According to Rabbi Hananel, sex reassignment surgery cannot change sex status. Okay, if someone is born a male, has surgery, he's still a male, according to that. There's some interesting question. This is an odd question. Here. A question came if a get is necessary. Reuven married a woman in the matter of Jewish law. Now, this is not, I didn't get the exact date on this one, but okay. A man came if a get is necessary. Get is a Jewish divorce. Reuven married a woman in the manner that Jewish women get married, and he had intercourse with her as men and women do. And after a number of years, something occurred to her, and she changed from a woman to a man in all ways. Okay. What is the law concerning this woman who was a woman and married a woman and then became a man? Do you have to dissolve the marriage? Do you need a get? What's the legal status? Does Reuven have to divorce her with a get in accordance with Jewish law, since she was his wife, a married woman? Or perhaps he doesn't have to give her a get, since she isn't a married woman, but a man? What do you do? In regard to our question, it seems that a get is not necessary, for he is a man now and not a woman. The get procedure is that the man gives the wife a get and writes in the get, "You are my wife." And we have no woman before us, but rather a man, right? The person has changed their gender. And he also writes in the get, "You are married, you are permitted to any man." And she is not a woman who is permitted to any man. Therefore, in my humble opinion, it seems that Reuven does not have to give a get to his wife who became a complete man. That makes sense? I mean, let's face it, this is a very odd question, right? And it's again, they're not asking, what questions are they not asking?
Is it okay to become a man?
Right. Well, is it okay to do this? How did it happen? Did this just suddenly one day magically happen? What's going on here? Notice how narrow they are speaking about this. Okay. That this woman has changed her sex and has become a male. That person is no longer Reuven's wife, and therefore a get is not necessary, since the language of the get would not apply to a male. The sex change does not change the sex status of the person. I mean, it's again, they're not asking some interesting questions here, which we might want to have answers to, right?
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
So if a get doesn't need to be done and the wife, who is now a man, wants to remarry, are they still married if the get is not given?
It is not clear, is it, as to okay, a get is not required. What does that mean? Does that mean that they're no longer married, that the wedding is invalid as of this point without a get, right? That's the question you're asking, right? If the wedding was invalid, then this person can get married again, right?
Both of them. Both of
Presumably,
them can get married again. Don't forget the man who married the woman originally. If she's considered still married to him as a man, he's considered still married to her, so he can't get married again either.
Yeah. I mean,
does it invalidate
if
all the
there's
time?
no get, they're still married. Correct? And he's also pointing out, but you really can't have a get because it doesn't apply. It's
But it's the get would dissolve the marriage between a man and a woman who's now a man. But what about all the time preceding the change?
Well, they still, preceding the change, they were still married, right?
Right. So, but that just voids out this person now who's become a male. It just negates their identity and the whatever time frame they were married as male and female.
Okay, but we're trying to figure out, right, but what's the implication? The implication, we're trying, the question is, can either of them get married now? Right? That's, we're trying to figure out, can either of them now, does the marriage still stand? Right? The person is no longer Reuven's wife, and therefore get is not necessary since the language of the get would not apply to a male. Therefore, sex change does change the sex status of the person. So he seems to be saying a get isn't necessary, but they're no longer married, which is a kind of an odd thing, right? It's a little peculiar. And again, he's not asking some of the more interesting questions. Here's another question. What about a husband who has his genitalia removed? Whether he needs to divorce his wife to dissolve the marriage, or whether a get is unnecessary since a person with a new sex status has appeared. No resolution to this question is reached. However, the author asserts that once the male sexual organs have been removed, the person is no longer competent to contract a valid marriage as a male. Sex status in regard to marriage depends entirely upon the presence of male genitalia. Okay. There seems to be, again, what we're looking at is purely based on a physical absence or presence of certain anatomical parts, right? The discussion here is if the anatomy has changed, has the gender change, right? Now, one person is saying sex change does change the sex status of the person. Why? If the genitals are different, then the status is different. By the way, he is not at all dealing with any of these psychological questions or some of the larger questions. They're just dealing notice this is a very narrow legal argument as to how to determine, is this person male or female? And the answer seems to be pull down their pants. I mean, I don't want to make light of this, but understand, dealing in a legal context as these scholars are, they need to have a very definite determination, right? And the definite determination is dependent upon physical characteristics. That's where they're going here. We're not dealing with the whole concept of what does the community feel about
I'm
transgender
going to
people?
raise that question.
How do they fit into the community? Are they accepted? Should they be rejected? Is there something wrong with it? Right? Notice both the sources. Again, Rabbi Rabinowitz is dealing with some of these very technical questions.
Oh, they just get a divorce and that's the end of the story.
Okay, but they're saying the divorce laws are based upon people of different genders getting married. Now we have a situation where that's not valid anymore.
Yes, and the whole thing is finished. Come on.
Right? I mean, the whole legal status of a get is based upon people of two different genders. Well,
So
that's not happening anymore. So how can we have a
saw
legal document that obligates people or binds people
Then they can do
when
whatever they want.
conditions are not met? Okay, sorry, go ahead. Who's going to talk?
They're not
Yeah,
gonna
I'm just saying, Sarah is raising the question that they should get a get before they have the surgery.
And the whole thing-
Ah, interesting question. As a matter, we're going to see later on, that's exactly what one of the rabbis suggests. Exactly.
Okay.
That is
Good.
precisely. Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely. There's no
But that,
problem
of
in
course,
it.
within the legal context of how these rules are written, that makes perfect sense. Right? While you're still
Yeah.
the gender you were when you got married, have the get and then change your gender.
That's right. Do what you want after.
That's a
do you change-
logical conclusion based upon what we're seeing here, and we'll see that again later. Good point. Judith.
What about revising the laws of the get to incorporate what wasn't being done previously in terms of SRS, et cetera. So-
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, well, of course, that would be even a bigger change, right? What you're suggesting, we'll see this later on as well. Maybe our legal system of marriage, divorce, and personal status doesn't have the type of documentation nowadays that reflects the realia on the ground. And maybe we need different legal structures, documents, and procedures that are consistent with what we are seeing today. That's what, Judith, right? Am I correct saying you? We'll see that too, right? I mean, that is, but notice in the traditional world, you're not going to say that, right? Because these are the legal procedures that there are, and we're not going to start creating new
What happens, John,
procedures.
if he stays with the
Arini,
person?
go ahead.
If they have a gender change and they stay with the person?
Yeah, Arini, I think
I have a question. Do conservative rabbis officiate as at lesbian and gay marriages?
We'll get into that in some detail. We'll see in the later.
Okay,
That's again a question. We have something called kiddushin, right? Part of the wedding ceremony.
mhm.
That is a structure that we have that assumes a male and a female. What do we do today? We'll look at that a little bit later. Good question.
Thanks.
Okay. So there's another, I don't want to go into this one in any great detail, but what about the widow of Elijah? My name's Eliyahu Hanavi. What happens to Eliyahu Hanavi? He goes up to heaven, right? He doesn't die. So, does his wife need a get? Is he alive or is he dead? Is she still married? Is she a widow? Right? Is that a good question? Why isn't it a good question?
It's not a good question because it's not a common occurrence. How many?
Okay,
how
it's not a
many
common
of us are
occurrence, but to
angels?
Elijah's wife, it's a real question, right?
I don't know. It seems like really getting into, I don't know, something a little not practical in the real world.
Okay, but notice the concept. Wife married to man. Man is now no longer living man on the earth, but is angel in heaven. Aha, his status has changed, right? So in this case of the change of the status of the husband, does the wife need a get? And might that not help us in these other questions of transgender? That's where it's going. Yes, it is a bit stretching things and it seems a bit odd. I understand that. But understand in a legal tradition, you're looking for precedent, right? Is there any precedent that we have in the legal tradition that talks about the change of a status of a male or a female that tells us whether or not a get is required? That's where they're going. Okay, Charlie.
But don't you think a change of status from human to angel is a little different from a sex change operation?
Oh, okay. So we admit when you're looking for precedent, I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that when lawyers look for precedent, they're just trying to prove their case, and they may be very abstract, and it may look a little bit, and another judge is going to say, that's crazy. You know, I don't accept that. But again, understand, we don't have a lot, we're looking for precedent in a tradition that really didn't deal very much with this, right? So what do we say? This particular argument doesn't require a get from Elijah's widow, since his status changed from human to angel, and the wife of an angel is not prohibited to others. Okay, yes, it is a bit pushing it. I will admit that. But again, if you're seeking precedent as to a legal system, yes, you do look deeply within what you have before you and try to find something that might help guide you. And that's a serious question, right? We do that all the time. Okay. Now you may or may not like the answer, but it's an interesting answer. Since he became an angel, she doesn't need a get. Okay, so she can get remarried. Okay. Carol, you're muted.
She's not considered an aguna?
The wife?
Yeah,
Oh,
the
oh,
wife.
oh, an
Her
aguna. In other words, a husband who
Her
has
husband
disappeared.
disappears. Her
Well, he
husband,
hasn't, quote, disappeared. We know where he is. He's up in heaven.
who's proven? Don't you need two people to prove that
Yes, yeah. To prove that they're dead or that they're gone. But we
they're
have
gone?
clear proof. We know where Elijah is.
Who proved that?
The Bible, it says he went up to heaven, right?
I both said that. Okay.
Yeah, the Bible says so, right? It's not like he was in a submarine that got sunk and we couldn't find it, or he went on a trip to trade merchandise in the Far East and never came back, right? Those are the real types of real cases. Elijah, we know what happened to him.
Okay. The Bible said so. Okay.
Yeah, right? I mean,
I'm just picturing his, Elijah's wife out on a date. So what happened between you and your first husband?
yeah. At the local bar, they're sitting around one night. Yeah, sure.
Secret.
Yeah, he went up to heaven, Okay. Yes, there is some humor here, but there is a serious question about seeking precedent, right? Okay, let's live it. Okay, and I mean, right? Okay, here, the wife of Elijah, the prophet of blessed memory, or the wife of Yehoshua ben Levi. Okay, the practical implications is for the future if someone should merit as they did. In other words, what happens if it happens again? Okay. I am really bewildered why you bothered to ask this question. In other words, the rabbi's answering says, oh, come on, what are you talking about? Surely, it's like, does Lot's wife cause ritual defilement? In other words, if you touch a corpse, you become ritually impure. So what happens if you touch the pile of salt that Lot's wife became? Does that hold the same status as a corpse? Okay, that's what he's asking. Okay, it is clear to them that a dead body causes ritual defilement and a pillar of salt does not. Okay, that a dead person causes defilement, the live person does not. Even though it is clear that Lot's wife died, nevertheless, she changed into something different. Yeah, the Shunammite's wife. Remember the story about the boy who died, and then Elisha comes and gives him some sort of mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and he lives again. Okay, it's in the Haftorah, one of the Haftorot. Similarly, we say that the man's wife is prohibited to others, and not the wife of an angel who is non-corporeal. Okay, so he's saying, if your husband becomes an angel, you can remarry. Okay, again, yes, and this is an interesting question, which we did ask. What about a get is not necessary for the dissolution of a marriage contracted prior to the so again they're saying a get is not necessary. Well, the get doesn't apply. Again, very clear. We're dealing in certain very narrow legal categories, right? Just as the wife of a person who has been removed, sorry, I lost something. Just as the wife of a person has been removed from the earth, Eliyahu, has her marriage terminated, so too does the wife of a person who has his sex status changed. Okay. Rabbi Walden, now, obviously these are crazy questions, you might say. There are other modern rabbis. Now we're talking about the modern period. This is Rabbi Tendler, Rabbi Rosner, these are modern rabbis, claim that SRS has no effect on sex status. According to them, a male to female person could no longer enter a marriage as a male due to his inability to function sexually as a male. However, this person cannot enter a marriage as a female. Again, we're dealing with, notice what we're dealing with here. The definition of can the person be married. We're not dealing about psychology. We're not dealing about the community, just very narrowly as to marriage for a person who has become a different gender, right?
Rabbi?
Now, let me just finish this.
Yeah, sorry.
Just to be clear. So we have some modern rabbis who are saying that someone who has undergone sexual reassignment surgery has no effect on, so they're saying it doesn't affect the sex status. They're saying not what the genitals are, but according to that, a male to female person, that's MTF, could no longer enter a marriage as a male. Why? Because he cannot function sexually as a male. He cannot consummate the marriage. Right? However, this person cannot enter the marriage as a female. So not only can he not enter marriage as a male because he cannot consummate the marriage physically anymore, but they are saying that the surgery does not change the gender of that person. Okay, Rini, go ahead.
Doesn't this all have to do with procreation? I mean, wouldn't that be a reason he can't, because he can't make children, and if he's a female, if he's changed to a female, he also can't make children.
But of course, we recognize that people who are sterile can get married, right? Even if you can physically have sex, if you may, not be.
Yeah, but you don't know that. You don't know that.
Oh, you're saying you don't know that, but you might. I mean, what people? What about people? Women past the age of menopause, they can get married.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Okay. So, right. Okay. All right. It
But
is
if you
clear from the
change-
sources there
yeah.
are two polar positions concerning sexual reassignment surgery. One claims that it has no effect on sex status of the person, or in other words, halakha does not accept the possibility of changing one's sex status. So we have two different opinions. All right. The other position that a change of the sex status of the person can and does take place since the external genitalia determine the gender. So we see in dealing with this, we've seen there's not an agreement, right? One side says it depends on physically what you are, and another side says no, it depends upon the genitalia that you were born with. And no matter what you do physically with it, you still remain in that gender. Okay. But notice again, the question is being asked, what's your gender? Right? Can you get married? Those are the legal questions that are being answered. Okay. So now Rabbi Rabinowitz, as a conservative rabbi, is trying to answer that question. What is the sexual status of one who goes sexual reassignment surgery? Okay. Okay. Various authorities have said that, the sex status will be determined by surgery. Others says that the sex status cannot be changed. Okay, so we have these two polar opposite opinions. The position that recognizes a change in sex status is based upon the concept that one's sex status is determined by the external genitalia. Okay. That now we're staking out a position here. Again, it all depends on anatomy. What your anatomy is, whether it was born that way or whether you had it surgically changed that way. One position is that's what your gender is, okay? This has been forcefully advocated by Rabbi Waldenberg, okay? And this is based on some traditional rabbis who say that sex change is naturally impossible. Well, now, of course, in ancient times, they didn't have these surgeries, right? So let's face it, things have changed. It is certainly possible today. His position could very well change if he saw the results of hormonal and surgical treatment. In other words, are we talking about you can't change it because it wasn't possible? Well, what if it is possible? Would that change your attitude? Good question. Therefore, to base one's position on such grounds seems implausible. See, Rabbi Rabinowitz is saying, wait a second, the ancient rabbis couldn't imagine this. Okay. Those who claim that we cannot change God's creation are closing their eyes to conversion and to transplants as to other medical procedures, which in fact do change God's creation. Oh, he's making an interesting parallel. We have the power medically and otherwise to change a person's status. If we were to claim that sex change is prohibited on this grounds, we would have to prohibit many medical procedures as well. Halakha has always been macroscopic and not microscopic. Therefore, external organs determine the sex status of a person. Genetic information may be helpful, but at present are not considered a determining factor. We're going to see this again a little bit more in detail. In other words, do you determine someone's sex by X and Y chromosomes? Maybe forget about the external genitalia. Let's just look at the chromosomes. And once we got the chromosomes, we have objective evidence as to what gender you are. Is that where we want to go? Okay. The same is true as DNA. Okay. The position of Rabbi Waldenberg on this issue fits the halakhic system, and therefore is, he says that you can't, what would be the status of those who do not undergo full SRS? Okay, well, what about if you want to become you're born a male, you want to be a female, but you don't want to go under SRS? This would refer to patients suffering from gender dysphoria who undergo hormonal treatments and partial surgery. So what would they be? What would they be? That person is still in the process, and therefore their status has not changed. Now, he's arguing here that unless you have a full SRS, your status has not changed. And if you did not have genital SRS, if you just had, your status has not changed. Okay, so he's going to argue. He's going to make those arguments. Do you have time? We have left. Okay. Okay, here's his conclusions. This is from 20 years ago. Conclusions from 20 years ago. Only those who have undergone full SRS, including phalloplasty and vaginoplasty, I may be pronouncing these wrong, are to be considered as having changed their sex status. This is a very narrow definition, right? Only and recognized so by Jewish law. A person who has undergone partial SRS is not deemed to have changed their sex status. So he's going with the question of physical attributes determining your gender, not your psychology, right? Not how you self-define, but physically. Then he goes on to these are some, technical issues that, of course, are left up there. A brit milah hatifat dam brit, in other words, taking a drop of someone who has already been circumcised and they want to be a male who's been already circumcised, want to become Jewish. Well, you can't circumcise him again. He's already been circumcised. So you take a drop of blood from where the foreskin had been attached. Okay. Hatifat dam brit is not required for one who has had a phalloplasty. In other words, if you've had the sexual reassignment surgery, you don't have to have a brit milah. A get is not necessary if one spouse undergoes SRS, since kiddushin are automatically annulled. Okay, if one spouse changes the gender, obviously we're going to say the marriage didn't take place. However, in the case of a male to female person, a get should be given, what would you suggest, before the SRS is complete, right? Was that what Sarah said, or someone said that here? Right. Okay. Let's just make this clear. Let's not have any problems. Do it before the surgery. Recognition by the civil authorities of the new sex status is required in order to marry a person who has undergone SRS. This will prevent us from performing same-sex marriages according to civil law. This was at a time when same-sex marriages were not allowed by civil law. It's an interesting question. We'll deal with it in a little more detail in the next class. And a new name should be given. Okay, that's what he figured 20 years ago. What's good and bad about this decision?
It's 20
Anyone?
years old.
What?
It's 20
Judy, you said
years
it's 20
old.
years old. So what is it missing?
DNA,
Okay, it's missing DNA. In other words, let's discuss whether the genes or DNA determine sex.
determines the
Let's
sex.
at least discuss that. I don't know what conclusion we're to come to, but let's at least discuss that. Okay, what else is
The
it?
psychology, the
psychology,
hormone treatments.
Psychology. I feel that I'm female, but I don't want to go through SRS. Well, according to this, you are not female, you're still male. You're only going to be considered female if you go through SRS, right?
Which takes it, and if you're going through SRS, then you've had lots of hormones.
That's correct. And if you start the hormones but don't have the surgery, what's your gender?
Still male.
According to this, if you didn't have the surgery, it says what you were born with, right?
Right.
Is that the reality on the ground?
Well, you have people who start,
Yes,
Judith, go ahead.
you have people who start the process, and as they're going through it, they're still weighing their decision and may delay their surgery or may ultimately not go through it, but continue to take the hormones and just maintain their current status with, without this, the sexual reassignment surgery, but continue to take the hormone treatments.
So they may be legally male, but they personally consider themselves female, and they haven't had the full surgery.
My daughter has a friend from college who entered college as a traditional female, who then started undergoing plans to have gender reassignment surgery and has not completed it yet, but has all the features of a male. They've now grown a beard and their body habitus has changed, and
So
they
this
physically
person,
look
if
like a
you
male.
asked, are you male or female, would say,
I'll ask Jess how they identify.
okay, they may not say, they may say either I'm male, I'm female, or
They
I'm
identify
indeterminate.
as a male, now that I think about it.
Yeah, so Rabbi Rabinowitz's rules would not really help that person at this point.
Who, by the way, is Jewish.
Okay. Okay. All right. We're running out of time. Actually, we've
Yeah.
run out of time, but I just want to, let's complete one or two other comments. Rini?
Well, I just wanted to say, even in Judith's comments that she just made now, and she called this person they, a lot of some people that, well, I know of a young woman who is now identifying as non-binary, changed her name and wants to be known as they. So she's not ready to be he. Well, she hasn't
Okay.
gone through any assignment, but apparently this person that Judith is talking about has male characteristics, but is still referred to as they. So it's all very confusing, even to the
Okay.
person who's going through it.
Those issues have not been dealt with in Rabbi Rabinowitz's teshuvah. They are going to be dealt with in the teshuvah we'll look at next week, the more modern one that was done just about a couple of years ago, Rabbi Sharzer's teshuvah. We'll take a look at that. We're really going over time, but I wanted to get through this. We'll take a look at this appendix next time also. So we see, again, there are narrow legal definitions that are concerning. We are not hearing about some of the psychological issues or some of the larger issues about transgenderism, which we'll look at next time. Okay, everyone have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, you
thank
too.
you.
Happy
Have a good
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving.
Everyone,
Happy
happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Have a good
Bye.
one, all. Thank you.
Thank you,
care.
Rabbi.
Welcome. We'll see you next week.